Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile build discussion. Today I'm going to take my fourth look at a skill in depth, its mechanics, the Ascendency classes that it synergizes with, and some of the key interactions that you'll need to know about. I'm going to be looking at Divine Ire today, and showing you how to build your own passive tree, as well as discussing the key interactions. So firstly, Divine Ire, you start out by charging up your laser. It's a channel skill, so you'll stand in place and you will channel away. While you're charging it up, you'll periodically deal damage to nearby monsters, and the nearby range is not tiny, but it's not huge either. You'll be able to hit a maximum of 5 monsters at a time baseline, and up to 7 if you can get the Eternal Tier Labyrinth enchant, which is a pretty good option, but is not necessary for this build. Every monster that you hit causes the laser to charge up faster. Each time that your period of cast time goes past, so each time that you go through a multiple of your cast time, which defaults for the skill at 220 milliseconds, but in practice will be lower than that. You will gain 1 charge on the skill, and you will also gain potentially more than that if you're damaging enemies. When you're charged up to 20, or early if you prefer, you can unleash a massive burst of death, which is a forward-facing laser beam that hits everything directly in front of you. This is one truly massive hit. The scaling on this spell allows it to really do a lot of damage in one shot. 140 to 210 does not seem like a lot of damage, that's for the level 20 version, but there is this critical line. Beam deals 100% more damage with hits and per stage after the first. So when you've got your full 20 stages, which is the maximum, the base damage is actually 20 times this amount, which is 2,800 to 4,200 damage. That is a staggering amount of damage for a level 20 skill gem. It's something like 3 times the damage that a fireball hit does. So really is a lot of damage in one hit. Those of you that are familiar with theory crafting in this game know that if you can deal a lot of damage in one hit, you can interact with ailments a lot. Shock, freeze, and ignite all work better when you're dealing one truly massive hit. And this skill does have the option to be used in conjunction with ailments. You'll notice here this beam deals 70% more damage with ailments per stage after the first. So that's a total of 1,430% of base ailment damage, so that is ignite, if you can make the skill ignite. It doesn't, being a lightning skill, it doesn't ignite by default, but you can get around that. This is Path of Exile, there's lots of exceptions. You can convert lightning damage into cold and then cold into fire by various means, or alternately you can equip the Stormfire Ring, which enables your lightning damage to ignite as well as shock. So there's a couple of options there. There's also the 3 Dragons Unique Helm as a third option that you can use. So lots of ways that you can cause things to ignite with Divine Ire if you want to go that route. Now, this skill defaults to half physical damage and half lightning, and it uses conversion. It's not dealing a base amount of physical damage and a separate base amount of lightning damage. What it does is it deals a base amount of physical damage, then converts 50% of that to lightning. Remember that, it'll be important later. In general, when you have a skill that partially converts to an element, it is best to work on fully converting it. There's several means that you can do this, and so just to name some of them, you can equip the unique gloves Sorrow, which will convert 50% of your physical damage into cold. You can attach a physical to lightning support gem. You can take the Divine Wrath Notable, which is on the outer rim of the passive tree, and if you imagine the whole passive tree as a clock, it's close to 10 o'clock, but somewhere maybe 9:45 on the clock, and it converts 15% of physical damage to lightning, but only on skills with the lightning tag. So that's lightning tag here. There is also a nearby node to that that does the same thing for fire skills. That is actually worth taking for other reasons. One of the other lines, you won't actually gain the conversion benefit, but you will gain the other benefits of that node, and you will take that if you're in the area of Divine Wrath. You will take Divine Fury as well. There is also a lightning damage and lightning conversion node on the tree, which is not too far from the outer rim and is about 1030 if you consider the passive tree to be a clock face. A great early game setup is to use Hrimsoro, and a great late game setup, and this requires you to unlock various quite rare enchants from Jun, is to get 25% conversion crafted onto gloves, as well as both passives. Now, let's talk Ascendancy classes. First up, I recommend Trickster. And if we have a look at the statistics here as to what people are playing with Divine Ire, this is the website poa.ninja. It's their build section, and it contains information scraped from the ladder for the Synthesis Softcore Trade-Enabled League. You can also go to other leagues if you wish. And it only shows the approximately 15,000 characters that are currently level 95 and higher in that league, so it's only showing successful players. And if we have a look here, we're looking at players that are using Divine Ire as their main skill, which is about 2% of the league. There are 388 of them, and a whopping 70% of them are Tricksters. 18% are Inquisitors. I'm not actually going to recommend the Inquisitor. I feel Trickster does everything that Inquisitor can do and does it better. We then have Hierophant, Elementalist, Occultist, Ascendant, Guardian, Pathfinder, Raider, Gladiator, and Assassin, with very small numbers of people playing those classes. And I've got some ideas on some of those classes. I think some of them are worth considering, but ultimately Trickster is the safe bet. And if we have a look at the damage output that these characters are doing, this is a list of all of the characters that are on this ladder that are using Divine Ire as their main skill, and listed in order of the damage output that they can put out with perfect play using the skill Divine Ire. And you'll see Trickster, 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 Trickster. Oh look, it's Tricksters all the way down. Literally the top entire screen full, I think that's something like 40 characters. The top 40 by damage output are all Tricksters. So let's talk quickly about why that is. Firstly, Trickster is defensively solid. It's not as defensively strong as the Occultist, which is an amazing defensive ascendancy, nor is it as defensively strong as the Juggernaut, which is probably the second best. However, it combines a very strong offense with a solid but not spectacular defense. Secondly, the Trickster has lots of channeling synergies, and let's bring up some of the notable skills that are of importance. Swift Killer. +1 to max frenzy and max power charges is nice. And 5% increased damage per frenzy and per power charge, so that's going to be 40% increased damage. And then gain a power or frenzy charge each second while channeling. This means that you can pretty much rely upon, in most situations, having maximum frenzy and power charges whenever you're fighting an intense boss. That is really, really powerful. That's the first powerful node. The second powerful offensive node, Harness the Void, I'll come back to in a sec. Then you've also got Ghost Dance and Escape Artist for defense, which they're the reason that Trickster is a medium power defensive ascendancy. Harness the Void, 25% chance to gain 25% of non-chaos damage with hits as extra chaos, and then 15% to gain 50%, 5% to gain 100%. Add that up, it is an average of 18.75% of the non-chaos damage that you're doing with hits added as extra chaos damage. So here you're thinking, 18.75%, who cares? That's nice, but it's not amazing. However, the way that conversion works in this game is absolutely broken with added damage as extra chaos. If you have 100 physical damage, then convert all of it to lightning, then convert all of it to cold, then convert all of it to fire, Harness the Void will not just give you 18.75% of the 100 damage once, it will gain you 18.75% of the physical, then 18.75% of the lightning, then the cold, then the fire. Now, whilst that would in theory add up to 75% of your damage added as extra chaos, which would be amazing because monsters have lower chaos resist than elemental resistances, in practice you're not going to be able to achieve 100% conversion at each step. It's not practical with any viable gear set. But you can get pretty close to it, and that's what we're going to do. This Harness the Void stacks with other sources of elemental as added chaos damage, like the Atzari Flask, which is, for an item that is very easy to acquire in a league, even solo self-found you can reliably acquire that item, it is extraordinarily powerful. It's a classic example of what I like to say of a unique item that is extremely cheap only because of its overabundance. It's the second most used unique item in the game at the moment, and given that the only more used item is the Watcher's Eye, which is basically a whole family of related but different items, you could make a case for saying that it is the most the most generalized power item in the game. So anyways, this combination of factors is the reason that Trickster is a top 2 Ascendancy in this league, and is the unquestioned best for Divine Eye builds. However, it's not the only option, and especially if you're planning on going for a Demigod's Dominance in this league, it may not even be the best one. So let's go through some of your other options. I mentioned ailments before. The Elementalist Ascendancy, with a focus on ailment proliferation, is an option. You can burn things like crazy. This pretty much relies upon acquiring the Stormfire Ring, which is not an expensive item in trade-enabled leagues, at least not after the first few days. However, I think it's probably an item you would not want to build a solo self-found character around unless you actually have the Stormfire Ring in your hands from getting it on another character. So for that reason, I would be hesitant to recommend for solo self-found attempting the Elementalist approach, but I believe there's a lot of potential for this to be explored further. You won't go as heavily into the adding extra chaos. What you will do is you'll try to proliferate shocks, freezes, and fire. Shocks, freezes, and ignites through the Elementalist, through the various powers that the Elementalist has. So that's a very good option that you should at least consider. Or alternately, you can even drop freeze entirely and just burn things instead. You could use a physical to lightning gem to convert all of the damage to lightning, then use a Stormfire Ring to both shock and ignite for the full amount of damage. So that's the Elementalist. And now I'm going to get to the hipster option. The hipster option is to go Guardian. Guardian has a node called Harmony of Purpose that gives you a 10% chance whenever you hit a monster to gain a random power charge. Sorry, not just power charge, a random charge. So it can be Endurance, Frenzy, or Power. I've tested this. I had a Guardian in Standard, so I logged into them and checked out what happens when you take Divine Ire, get yourself surrounded by a bunch of mobs, and start charging up. And essentially, within 2 seconds, you have 3 of each charge. Potentially more than 3. I only had 3 on that character because they'd had all of their passive tree reset, and I haven't played them since then, so they're in a broken state. It was really interesting to play around with, and I think there's a lot of potential for it. Harmony of Purpose also shares any charges you gain with nearby party members. So if you're playing with friends, this is a big boost to them. You'll basically ensure that they will have 3 of each charge that they don't care about in their build, and 5, 6, 7 of any charge that their build normally tries to stack. So if they're a critical strike build, then you can pretty much rely upon granting them their full 7 power charges if they're a 7 power charge build. The other thing you can do, you're going to be right up close and personal with enemies with this build. The Guardian's a very tanky Ascendancy. You will have the durability to take a few hits, and you will be close to a bunch of monsters. When you're close to a bunch of monsters and you've got the durability to take hits, Discharge is hilarious fun. I don't think this is going to be very strong, but I think you could have a lot of fun, a lot of laughs by setting off Discharge when you're surrounded by monsters, relying upon the Guardian's Time of Need node in order to regenerate life that you lose because you're playing so up close and personal. So yeah, that's an option to consider. The untested and ultra hipster option, and this comes with a very important caveat that I believe I understand the mechanics of this correctly, but I have not personally tested it. This is a skill that deals physical damage and can also deal lots of chaos damage. Physical and chaos damage can be scaled through poison. I'm really interested to see if anyone that is more knowledgeable about poison builds than me can figure out a way to make this work with the Assassin. The Assassin is a class that scales chaos damage, or sorry, scales poison very well if you choose to go that route, and it also has lots of critical strike related nodes. I would be really interested to see if anyone can make a build that deals lots of that tickles the monsters a bit with the Divine Ire's proximity blast, inflicting lots of small poisons on them, which then softens them up for when you fire off your big laser, which then hits for lots of physical damage and lots of chaos damage because of the various... you could use all of the same conversion shenanigans that you'd use on a Trickster, and then that chaos damage then enables them to stick a big poison on the monster once it's already been made more susceptible to poisons by some of the other assassin nodes. I will warn you though that this is completely untested and is just an idea in my mind, and the last idea in my mind that I had that sounded cool was a terrible build that bricked about tier 8 maps. Let's talk standard links. Default, you should be using Divine Ire linked to Infused channeling and Controlled Destruction, I believe at least. Energy Leech is an excellent 4th node because you will be taking damage, and so as long as you've got at least a modest amount of energy shield, you will be taking damage, and so you'll be leeching energy shield a lot of the time. You're doing lots of small hits, and so Energy Leech will gain you both a bit of sustain, a bit of energy shield coming in to mitigate some of the hits you're taking, and also will gain you a lot of extra damage. You'll get the bigger bonus for Energy Leech support, which is which is the percentage more damage that you deal while you are actively leeching energy shield. You get a small bonus when you're at full energy shield and a big bonus while you're actively leeching it. So first 4 links I recommend are Divine Ire, Infused Channeling, Energy Leech, and Controlled Destruction. Then you will need to experiment with the rest of them, and this will be affected heavily by your choices of whether or not you're bothering with ailments and what else you're choosing to, and how you're converting damage. Physical to lightning. Cold to fire may be used, and cold to fire requires extensive setup. It doesn't just work on its own. Concentrated effect and elemental focus are all skill gems to consider as your 5th and 6th links. For cold to fire, you will need to use other means to convert some of the damage Divine Ire does into cold damage. 2 options are the Harimsara unique gloves and the Call of the Brotherhood unique ring. Auras and Heralds on this build will vary a lot. You should default to Zealotry and Herald of Ash, but feel free to change from this if you have a reason. If you understand why you're changing it, by all means go ahead and do it. Consider Vile Righteous Fire as an I need this screen full of monsters dead yesterday emergency button. And you're welcome to experiment with Blasphemy Curses here, with Hatred, with the Aspect of the Spider, all sorts of other options. Lastly, I want to give you a list of aspirational gear to maybe aspire to acquiring during the league. This is going to be very difficult to get all of these items. They're going to be in high demand, both for Divine Ire builds and for other builds, and they're also quite rare. So firstly, you're going to want a Divine Perfect Atzuri Flask. That means a flask that has 15% of elemental damage as added chaos and 20% of physical as added chaos. That's the perfect rolls on that flask. This actually isn't as rare as it sounds. The flask drops 50% of runs of the Apex of Sacrifice, and 1 in 36 of the flasks will drop Divine Perfect, because there's only 6 possibilities for each of the 2 rolls. The physical damage is 15 to 20 inclusive, so that's 6 numbers, and the elemental damage is 10 to 15 inclusive, so that's again 6 numbers. 6 times 6 is 36, so you're looking at 36 possibilities. So it's 1 in 72 to get that when you run the Apex of Sacrifice. Probably not something you're going to want to run 72 times yourself, but a lot of people do run the Apex of Sacrifice, and so these will exist in the league. Now we're getting to things that are a bit more unattainable. An Eternity Shroud with a premium corrupt on it. The Eternity Shroud is the new item that was added to the Uber Elder encounter. It is insane. It is incredibly strong. It has all of the same effects, essentially, as the Harness the Void ability on the Trickster, but it gives them to all of your skills. So what it does is... let's just bring it up, actually. The Eternity Shroud. And that's the wrong... The Eternity Shroud. So I'm just going to bring this up on the Path of Exile wiki so you can look at the item. And it is a reasonably high evasion and energy shield armor. Not reasonably high, but they're okay with the Trickster mechanics. that grant you energy shield based off your evasion rating in various ways. But you'll always make this line, you'll always divine it to get 5%, so we'll just treat it as 5%. Gain 3 to 5% of elemental damage as extra chaos damage per shaper item equipped. Hits ignore enemy monster chaos resistance if all equipped items are shaper items. So your goal here is to get is to equip 8, 9, or 10 shaper items to get that ridiculous 40, 45, 50% of elemental damage as extra added chaos damage. So if we think of how good the Ascendancy Flask is on its own, you're talking basically 3 times the benefit of the Ascendancy Flask, nearly. Then hits ignore enemy monster chaos resistance if all equipped items are shaper items. That's actually very difficult to do because we're going to want to use conversion uniques, and those don't exist as shaper items unless you use chance orbs to turn a normal item into them. So the whole of League goal gear that I'm going to suggest is to chase down 2 shaped Call of the Brotherhood. This is going to be extraordinarily difficult to find. You're probably going to need to purchase Trash to Treasure prophecies, which cost about 15 exalts in mature League like Synthesis at the moment. And so that's another huge goal to aspire towards. Finally, Shaper Scepters with physical as added elemental and elemental as added chaos. If you want to have a look at one person that has managed to acquire all of these. Now, this is not my character. This is someone that really has an impressive version of this build. You'll see on the Synthesis ladder, there's a character named Slatey_Team Tower, and he has the most incredible equipment I've ever seen for this build. This is going to be a shaped headhunter, judging by the rest of his gear, so he has acquired that by using chance orbs on shaped leather belts inside maps that have the Zana Nemesis mod on them. And there are 2 shaped Call of the Brotherhoods, Eternity Shroud, and the Eternity Shroud has believe it has a premium corrupt on it. Is this the right person? No, it's someone else actually, sorry, it's not that character, it may be this one. It is this guy. He has a double corrupted Eternity Shroud with +2 to level of socketed AoE gems. And this guy doesn't use a headhunter, he uses a belt that is life and resists, uses an amulet that's a shaper amulet with life resists, and the incredible double tier 1 shaper physical as added elemental damage. So this is Aeon Sunrise. This is the character that's dealing the most damage with Divine Ire in the entire league, and his build is something that you're not going to be able to match this in almost certainly, but it's the gear to aspire towards acquiring. Once more, this is not my character. This is just someone that is clearly an exceptionally resourceful and competent player. So you'll see very powerful items all through. And the key thing, he's using these scepters can actually be somewhat deterministically crafted. What you want to get is, well, when I say deterministically, you'll need to get a Void Scepter that is shaper affected, then scour it, use alterations until you get one of the physical as extra lightning or physical as extra chaos. Then once you've got that by itself, if it has another mod on it, annul that off. Then use a Regal Orb, and the Regal Orb, you want it to get the other mod that you're missing. Once you've got the two mods you're looking for there, you can then go and multi-mod it. This is not an easy task this is not something that's easy to acquire, but this is not a merit tier scepter. It's just a very impressive one. And the second one's almost exactly the same. So yeah, lastly, you'll notice that the gloves have 25% of physical converted to lightning, which is a very powerful Jun craft. So anyways, that is the things that I would raise to consider, or that I would suggest considering if you're thinking of playing Divine Ire. The reasons to play Divine Ire are that it is a medium speed clear speed skill that is absolutely incredible at deleting bosses quickly. If that sounds like the playstyle you want for the Flashback League, then I would suggest giving Divine Ire a shot. It is entirely possible that some of the very powerful interactions with conversion will not last until 3.7. So I would suggest if you want to give it a go, this may be your last chance to play it in its current form. In any case, if you've got any questions, fire away below, and I wouldn't mind suggestions for one more build to put together before the league starts tomorrow.